Well, good afternoon to everyone. It's our pleasure, the Mexican Space Agency, to announce the next presentation. And to moderate this presentation, I would like to introduce Dr. Jaime Andrade Villanueva. He's the Rector of University Center of Health Sciences in the University of Guadalajara, and he's going to conduct this presentation with Dr. Antuñano.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome all you to the Space Medicine and Tourism Space Transportation Panel. First, it is an honor to me be the moderator of this important panel. I want to thank also to the International Astronautics Congress staff. The aim of this panel is to present the advances in space transportation from the point of view of the implications for space medicine. It will be focused on the development of the space medicine in Mexico in the past 5 years by presenting the outcomes and the future perspectives of space tourism transportation, but also to the application in medicine. The speaker is an honor for me to present Dr. Melchor Antuñano. Dr. Antuñano was born in Mexico City and is a graduate of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, School of Medicine. He completed the residency program of aerospace medicine at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. He is currently now the director of the USA Federal Aviation Administration Civil Aerospace Medical Institute at Oklahoma. He's credited with more than 700 professional presentations and invited at lectures at national and international conferences, all in aerospace medicines in 40 countries, and with 71 scientific publications covering a variety of aerospace medicine topics. He is past president of the Aerospace Medical Association, the Space Medicine Association, and also the Ibero-American Association of Aerospace Medicine. He is now or will be the president of the International Academy of Aviation and Space Medicine and member of the International Academy of Astronautics. He is honorary also member of the Austrian, Brazilian, Colombian, Greek, Mexican, Peruvian, Slovenian, and Turkish societies of aviation aerospace medicines. Welcome, Dr. Antuñano.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I'm going to be sharing with you some perspectives about personal risk, safety considerations in commercial human spaceflight, but I will give the US perspective, from perspective of the regulator, the FAA, Civil Aerospace Medical Institute, the Office of Aerospace Medicine. And also I'm going to cover some other issues about risks that will have an impact on commercial space participants. And if we depart from this point, that we have reached that point in technology where technology has surpassed human capabilities. Therefore, what's the weak link? We are the human side of the equation. And that, if you start with aviation, but you go to space operations, the weak link continues to be the human. And Albert Einstein said, I never think of the future, it comes soon enough. And in several areas, we can say that we're already behind the power curve because the technology happened faster than our ability to think about all of the potential consequences of being involved with space operations, particularly in the commercial space side. But I just want to share this with you. In the US, it was not until November 1995 that we started regulating commercial space transportation. And it was not until 1998 that Congress expanded that authority to us to actually include the licensing of reentries and reentry sites. So as you can see, that's relatively recent. So at the present time, the US is the only country that has established licensing requirements for commercial space operations. And we have the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act of 2004. And the bottom line there is that for people who want to fly in space, they will have to fly at their own risk. Now let me start with one thing. Please raise your hand if you would like to fly in space. Just raise your hand. Now put it down. Raise your hand if you do not want to fly in space. Great, first time that everybody wants to do it. That's great. But this is one thing that we have to find different ways of getting access to space. Obviously, some professional astronauts, some will be commercial flight crews, and the rest of us may have to be space flight participants. But that issue about informed consent means that every passenger has to be fully informed about all of the potential risks of participating in flight, according to our own regulations in the United States. Which means that we have to determine what kind of potential risks should be disclosed. Is it everything that is considered a risk, or some, or the bigger risks that you can think about? But you have two purposes. You want to minimize the liability for the operator by sharing what is likely to happen or the potential risks. But at the same time, we have another objective in the United States. We also have to promote the development of the space industry. So we have to be very careful in that balance between those two things. So, with that in mind, for each mission, this individual, or if it is me that want to go in space, every risk has to be disclosed for each mission, each known hazard, as it says there, and any risk that could result in serious injury, death, disability, total or partial loss of physical and mental function. If you think about that, how many things can produce that? So there are many potential risks that could lead to that. At the same time, we have to tell them that there are certain hazards that are still not known. So with that in mind, why is risk disclosure important? Well, different perspectives. But one of the big ones, at least in the United States, is this one. Is passenger safety and liability issues. We have in a society in the United States where people sue for all kinds of things. So you have to protect yourself. Therefore, we have to have some kind of liability protection. At the same time, the public, us, we have the right to take a risk with our own lives. We do. And in fact, we should promote that because according to what Michelangelo said, the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we reach it, but what it is too low. Excuse me, we don't reach it and it is too low and we reach it. We have to keep pushing the envelope. We have to keep taking chances. We have to keep taking risks. And also, we have to be prepared to deal with risks in disguise. And in space operations, we do not know all of the potential risks. So we have to be cognizant that some things are unknown. So the question to you, is it risky to fly in space? Yes, it is. But it depends. Depends if it is a suborbital flight versus an orbital flight, if it is a short flight versus long flight. But what are the populations impacted by commercial space flights? You have obviously the crews who will be responsible for the operation of the vehicle, and then you have the space flight participants. So depending upon what they do, there are different implications as far as risk factors. But if you group them together as occupants, you have these three areas of factors: individual, external environmental, and operational factors. But let's start, and I'm not going to cover everything. But any undisclosed or pre-existing medical condition, that's what we are starting to see with people who are applying for commercial spaceflight. So are we going to give waivers or not? What about sudden, unexpected in-flight medical emergencies? Now, the last bullet there, self-imposed stress. Right now, if you think about flying in a commercial transport, airline transport, People can drink alcohol. People can go to the bathroom, but many times the self-imposed stress, how are you going to control that? If you have a person who is addicted to smoking, cannot smoke. If it is a person who is addicted to drugs, cannot use them in flight. If it is addicted to alcohol, what are you going to do? Are you going to give them alcohol? We do it in airline operations. So what are we going to do in this type of operation? So space motion sickness, we know that even among professional astronauts, the incidence of space motion sickness is high. Well, what can we expect about the rest of the population, the rest of us? Unknown or undisclosed pregnancy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Undisclosed use of medications, and also disruptive passenger behavior. So, do we know the medical risks of flying in space? No, we don't. Because in general, most of the people who have flown in space are generally normal people who are career astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts, not somebody from the general population. So we do not know all of the risks. Here is one example. We have John Glenn. He flew for the first time when he was 40 years old. He flew again when he was 77 years old. Does that mean that he was perfectly healthy the second time that he flew? No. He had to receive several medical waivers in order to be able to fly. But he flew, enjoyed the experience, and it was okay. So why not have more flexibility? However, at the present time, flying in space is not like taking a roller coaster ride. We have to have some kinds of checks and balances, but we can be flexible with them. So let me give you a couple of examples about medical findings among commercial orbital spaceflight participants. Dr. Gregory Olsen was one of the flyers in Space Adventures operation. In fact, his case was studied by Dr. Richard Jennings, and it was published in the literature, so what I'm going to share with you is no longer private information. But here you have an individual who was 57 years old when he applied to fly. He had all of these pathologies, and essentially for those of you who are not in the medical field, he had a problem with his lungs. He had also like a tumor there between the lungs. He had some cavities in the lungs that could be because of tuberculosis. And he had also heart rhythm problems. So initially, he was not qualified. He was not going to be able to fly. But he underwent medical treatment, including surgery, and he was qualified with a waiver process. But then at the same time, he was tested in an altitude chamber, a high altitude mixed gas simulation to see if he could breathe correctly, oxygen. He was put in a zero-G flight and in a human centrifuge. After all of that, he was qualified, he flew, enjoyed the experience, and why not? So, what is the medical screening guidance for commercial spaceflight participants? What we're looking for is not for career astronauts. For spaceflight participants, you're looking for what's the minimum medical requirement that they fly. They are exposed to these conditions, which will be acceleration, deceleration, decreased pressure, microgravity. Radiation mostly is a concern for orbital flights. And I have heard many times throughout this conference, individuals saying, well, we have to worry about radiation exposure in suborbital flights. They are too short to be concerned about radiation. Orbital flights, yes. Suborbital, no. Now, when medical screening guidance has been developed, and I will give you all of the examples of what is available today in the literature, was made on certain assumptions, that you were going to have a cabin environment which was equivalent to an airline transport, or you would have a pressure suit. But number two, that you would be able to evacuate by yourself in case of an emergency. So here I'm not going to talk about each and every one of these, but we have had several examples of groups that we put together to come up with guidance for medical screening. So here I'm going to give you just a quick list of Aerospace Medical Association. At the International Academy of Astronautics, we actually did a working group on that. Two more from another one from the Aerospace Medical Association. We issued our own guidance from the FAA for commercial space operations for both spaceflight participants and crew members. And then more from the Aerospace Medical Association. This was another group within the International Association for the Advancement of Space Safety. And here you have another study group from the International Academy of Astronautics. Now, what is the latest one? This is the latest one. So if you want to get a copy of what's the most up-to-date information based on everything else that was published before, This is it. And this covers both. It includes crew members and the spaceflight participants for both suborbital and orbital flights. Different organizations we put together to participate in the development of this guidance. And if you want, this is the actual website. So you can actually download that document from here. That included everything else that was published in the previous 12 years. So until today, there is nothing more comprehensive than that we have in this particular document. So this is being used, once again, as guidance. Why? In the case of pilots or the crew, the flight crew, we can regulate, we can establish standards, but we cannot do for spaceflight participants. At least in the United States, we do not have the authority to do that. So what did we look for medical conditions that could prevent people from flying both orbital or suborbital flights? And just in general, we don't want people to die, number one. We don't want them to have a medical emergency, number two. They have to use personal protective equipment, so they should be able to have that done without any problems. Not interfere with in-flight emergency procedures, and at the end is compromise the health and safety of everybody else in the flight. So as long as it is under those conditions, that gives us a lot of flexibility. But there are other considerations, and I'm going to give you an example here. Do you remember Professor Stephen Hawking, our famous physicist? He wants to actually go in space. But what was the first step? To do a parabolic flight. So he actually had a flight in zero-G. They prepared for that flight. His private physicians actually did a test where they simulated somebody else to be Stephen Hawking. The medical team simulated what kind of emergencies could happen to him in flight. They carried all of the medical equipment that he would require when he flew, including all of that equipment that I mentioned right there. So once you do that, you are prepared for the actual flight. In this case, was a dedicated flight just for him. So what that says is, well, you can have dedicated flights for somebody else if they can afford them. So he flew. Look at that smile on his face. He has not had that huge smile since he started getting sick. But the fact that he's doing what he loves to do shows that it is possible. What's next? He wants to go in space. This is suborbital. He wants to go orbital. In fact, he wouldn't mind going to the moon. He wouldn't mind going to Mars. But if we can make it possible, why not? Aerospace medicine should not be an obstacle. Should be a supporter within certain range of probability, okay? But then we have other considerations. Just raise your hand. How many of you would let children fly in space? Few. How many of you would say, no way, Jose? Just raise your hand. And here we don't have enough evidence about what is likely to happen to children in flight. You have to worry about several things. The same stress factors that affect adults, but we do not know how that's likely to affect children. But if you want to go to another one that is even more troublesome, how many of you would allow a pregnant woman to go in space? Raise your hand. How many of you would say no? Okay, usually that's the case. The majority says no. Do we have enough scientific evidence to say that it would be safe for a woman, pregnant woman, to fly in space? We don't. In the United States, what is the actual prevalence of ectopic pregnancy? That means pregnancy outside the uterus. It's about 1 in 50 women. But what is the likelihood of having a spontaneous abortion in the female population in the United States? It's high. It's up to 20%. So what that means is that if that happens to you in flight, that becomes a sudden medical emergency. We don't want that to happen in space. What about another controversial consideration? Let's say that any of us gets diagnosed today with pancreatic cancer, late stage, which means your life expectancy may be 2 months or 3 months from now. How many of you would allow that person with a terminal diagnosis of cancer to fly? I would. As long as it is a dedicated flight and does not compromise the safety of everybody else. But under those conditions, why not? And we are applying sound medical principles, but we are trying to help, not to prevent this from happening. Then if we start now, I'm going to move a little bit into the non-medical side, but still, obviously, it has implications for safety for the occupants. And let me say, when I told you that the informed consent has to include all of the potential risks of the flight, well, we have winged vehicles for suborbital flights, and we have rockets. If it is a winged vehicle, it will function like an airplane. So this is just to give an example of, on a final approach to landing, whether it's an airplane or a winged space vehicle, if you have a crosswind, look at that airplane still trying to land on that runway. And it is almost perpendicular to the runway. Well, should we share that if we have, depending upon the location, that we may have bad weather conditions? Then what about this? This is lightning. This lightning hitting a 747 taking off from Narita, Japan. Is this only an issue about aviation? It is not. Here you have Apollo 12 that was hit by lightning twice during liftoff. Then you have the Atlas Centaur 67 that it was hit 4 times, and it affected the navigation system, so it was necessary to send a signal to destroy it because it was going to go off course. Now, let me ask you a theoretical question here. Let's say that you have people on board, and now the vehicle takes off, and because of guidance issues, starts going in a different heading, maybe to a populated area. Should that be allowed, or should we send a destruction signal? Do we have to protect people on the ground, or do we only protect the occupants on board the vehicle? So there are things that we need to think about, because things could happen. Here you have the space shuttle that was hit by lightning. Now, what do you think is that? That is hail, granizo, for those of you in Spanish. Granizo, hail hitting an airplane. Has that happened in space? Yes. Here you have STS-117 was damaged by hail. So it is not just airplanes, it's just weather. Weather happens everywhere. Ice formation, we have problems with ice formation in aviation. Is that the only issue? No. If you remember, the Challenger accident was because of low temperature, and the seals were not as effective as they should have been at lower temperature. If you have a downdraft, let me show you what can happen. Oh, before that, wildlife. That's another problem that keeps growing everywhere around the world. We are protecting birds. As a result of us protecting birds, there are more birds colliding with aircraft. But is that only aircraft? No. We also have a couple of examples, and here I'm showing you some photos of what's happening with birds. But the space shuttle, July 2005, was hit by a vulture. So if we have spaceports in different locations, and we are choosing, in general, spaceports where? Close to the coast. And what kind of bird is becoming more and more prevalent on the coast? Pelicans and eagles and seagulls. And we're having more and more problems with those birds because we're protecting them as well. Here's a woodpecker actually causing holes in the insulation material of a shuttle. So it is not just crashing with them. In this case, it's just eating at the protective layer. In-flight decompression, yes, we have them in aviation. Do we have them in space operations? Yes, we do. We unfortunately had in Soyuz 11 this case where it was unfortunately fatal for the crew, but it is not theoretical. Has happened. This was close actually to losing the Mir space station. Fortunately, they were able to close the hatch to the module that was compromised, but these are not theories. It is happening. Now, we jump from here. We have been talking about space debris, low Earth orbit, geostationary orbit, geopolar orbit. Well, this is for orbital flights. Here you have the long duration exposure facility that stayed there longer than what it was possible or what was planned because of the accident of the Challenger shuttle. So it stayed longer to find out what happens to different materials in space and the impact of micrometeoroids. So here you see each of these arrows is pointing to a microcrater caused by very small debris in space. And this is one of the doors of the Hubble Space Telescope. Here you have that windows of the space shuttle were replaced. Why? Because of impact with debris. This was a speck of paint traveling at high speed and causing a 1/4-inch crater in one of the windows. So, yes, if we have orbital commercial space vehicles, we have to think about these things. Here you have just to show you that what is the impact risk depending upon the location and the components of the International Space Station. Well, here you have it. Now, what we have to think about that if we start having more commercial space operations, more vehicle, both suborbital, if something happens and there is a disintegration, one thing that was not as emphasized in the news, when you had, unfortunately, the Columbia disintegrating in the atmosphere, what was happening to the components? They were falling through the atmosphere. So what was necessary was to clear the aviation space underneath so that you would not have airplanes hitting objects coming from the shuttle. So that's one vehicle. If you start having hundreds or thousands of vehicles, then we have to start thinking more about what could be the potential issue of atmospheric debris, not space debris. And some of the objects obviously are also big objects, not only the small ones. Ionizing radiation, I will not talk about that because there has been plenty of conversation about this. But here is the main thing, that the same type of radiation, comparing the effects on Earth to the effects on space, the effects in space are more severe. And why? Not completely understood yet. So that's one issue that is worrisome. Now there is another one with charged particles that probably you haven't heard. If you have electronics in an airplane, navigation, for engine control, for everything that you have to worry about charged particles because they can affect the microchips in the computers. But one thing that we didn't think until a couple of years ago, and in fact we had to do some research through the Center of Excellence in Commercial Space Transportation, if we have people who have implantable medical devices, defibrillators, pacemakers, insulin pumps, they have microchips. So could they be affected by charged particles and not only worry about the computers in the airplane, but now you have to worry about the computers in the medical devices? We're going to get a report very soon on that and try to answer that question. Non-ionizing radiation, exposure to microgravity, I'm not going to talk about physiology, but let me jump from here to the type of acceleration. And here there are some misconceptions, starting with this. What kind of G-load, the maximum G-load, did you get on the shuttle? And everybody thinks that it was a high G-load. It was not. Maximum was about 3 Gs. And it was on the x-axis because you were sitting, so it was from your chest to your back, not from your head to your feet. The Saturn V was the one that, yes, it was increased. It was about 6.5 to 7. But actually, Gemini was the biggest acceleration rate, or the largest. It was close to 8. Now, on the Spaceship One, the highest G-load on that one, on the final turn before landing, it was about 6 Gs. So people have a misconception that everything is high acceleration. No, it is not. In fact, if you go to an amusement park, a big roller coaster, if you go to Cedar Point in Ohio, the biggest roller coaster in the world, you will experience more acceleration in the roller coaster than the acceleration that you experience in the space shuttle. And it is an amusement park. It is not a space vehicle. So we have to think carefully about acceleration rates. And once again, issues about acceleration are not theoretical because we have had incidents related to that, Soyuz 4 and Soyuz 5. It had a tumbling 9G trajectory, so it happened. High intensity noise, that continues to be an issue, not outside the vehicle, but inside the vehicle. Could be the station, could be the shuttle, could be whatever commercial space vehicle. So ear protection may be a requirement. But also vibration. And vibration, and I cannot show that video because I was not able to load it here. But during the space shuttle launch, if you actually watch the videos in the back, but also in the front, you have the astronauts vibrating. Well, you cannot have fine psychomotor coordination when you're going like this. So good that you have automated launch sequences because then you don't have to perform manual functions. But in commercial space vehicles, you will have completely manual flights. You may have some semi-automated, and you will have some fully automated. So that's another issue. But then what are the effects inside your body, in your organs? So from that, we go to cabin air. Once again, it's not theoretical. Unfortunately, we had Apollo 13. And one of the concerns had to do with what was going to happen with the quality of the air. Why? Because it was a buildup of CO2. And I have 5 minutes left, according to my alarm. So I want to jump from here and show you a couple of things. Odors, that may not be a safety issue, but that's a comfort issue, and comfort issue, depending upon how uncomfortable it is, may affect your performance. Temperature issues, yes, extremes, high and low. But let me just, the last 4 minutes, I will talk about post-accident human survival factors. And we know that the factors affecting crash survivability are those. You have the container, the vehicle, you have the restraints, you have the environment, the energy absorption capability of the structure, the seat, the restraint systems, and the post-crash factors. So, when you have a wing space vehicle, is different than a capsule. And depending upon what kind of vehicle will be what kind of impact you have to worry about and the transmission of that impact to the occupants. So here, let me show you a hard landing on an airplane. That's a hard landing, okay? And with a wing vehicle, could be the same thing. What's an unstable landing? That's an unstable landing. You will see it in a second. Okay. So we go from here. It's not theoretical. We have unfortunately had accidents where the impact was what, of course, caused the fatalities. Something about crash worthiness. This, yes, it was a mishap because it was landing gear didn't deploy on this particular flight, but this talks about the positive thing of designing it correctly to be able to evacuate and actually absorb the impact, and it did it. So once again, not theoretical aspects. There are different ways of actually preventing something like this. You can have a deployment of a parachute. This is a 022, comes from factory with a parachute. But we'll use parachutes for capsules, evacuation systems, the Stratus. Well, that was a newer design of a spacesuit, but also this was a treasure trove of technology that was developed for this particular mission. So let me jump from here and show you some of the implications of the restraint systems, and we will finish with this. You can have a single point, a 2-point, a 4-point, and a 5-point harness. If you have, like the space shuttle, it was a 5-point harness. I wonder how comfortable will be that for spaceflight participants if they want to be restrained with 5 points. It is uncomfortable. But what are the consequences? So these are some of the tests that we do in the Institute. We crash stuff. We actually have fun destroying things. But this is a 16G impact where the seat and the restraint systems are doing what they are supposed to do. Now, this is if you have multiple ROS. So here it becomes critical not only the seats, the restraint systems, but also your position when you have an impact situation here. So you look at the passengers in the back having an impact with the back of the seat in front of them. Survivable, minor injuries, but survivable. This is not survivable. And what's the difference? Just the type of seat. Just the type of seat. And unfortunately, let me tell you, some airplanes in the world still carry these old 9G seats that don't meet the 16G standard anymore, okay? And now if you're talking about capsules, you are seating. So that's the type of impact that you will have, vertical impact. So you can actually create seats. The block seat that I showed right here, that can take 30 Gs, 30, okay? So it is not that fancy if you know how to do it. And obviously you have other technologies, airbags, rear-facing seats, crash-worthy seats. So here I'm just going to show you, that's it, 15 seconds. This is the newest design of airbag that deploys from a seat belt. So that protects you. If you fly the new generation of Boeing 787s, Airbus, and also Boeing 737s, Airbus 350s, every single seat belt has a built-in airbag. So, with that in mind, we have to prepare for evacuation. And you have post-crash fire, but there are ways of doing right things, fire retardants, immediate evacuation within 90 seconds, and then they are survivable. And with that in mind, it once again not theoretical, and we finish right there, which emphasizes the need to have also survival training, and survival training in all kinds of environments, because you never know where you may end up landing. So we will have time for a few questions.
Thank you, Dr. Antoniano.
Thank you.